As you guys know, many of you guys know that Bernie Sanders obviously was in the second night of debates when all the Democrats faced each other. Obviously, they faced each other in the first night of debates as well. That was 10. That was a group of 10 Democrats on the first night, group of 10 Democrats on the second night. And there was obviously some poll numbers that came out, as is the case with every debate that happens these days. There's always polls that get released afterwards. People kind of get an idea of how well the politicians did after after the debate takes place, and then they kind of get an idea of where they are in the kind of in the standings, I guess, kind of in a ranking kind of way. So Bernie Sanders, I think he did a decent job during the debate. I don't think he stood out as much as he wanted to. He kind of let Kamala Harris go after Joe Biden a lot. He seemed to kind of stay in the background a little bit more, not really make himself heard as much. But when he was making good statements, he was definitely speaking up and speaking loud and making sure he was heard. But he was definitely not the main guy, making all the noise. That definitely was going more towards Kamala Harris, much more towards Kirsten Gillibrand, a little bit of Julian Castro, Eric Swalwell. Those three are not very, they're not very high in the polls, but they definitely tried to get a lot more attention. So, but either way, as much as good or not good as Bernie Sanders did, that didn't really seem to matter to the mainstream media as usual, because they decided to portray Bernie's campaign currently as this doom and gloom situation where he's not. He's supposedly not doing very well, even though he's still doing very well in the polls, at least the majority of the polls. I've always maintained that we need to get through at least, I would say at least two debates, and I mean, like, at least in the case of Bernie, he needs to get through two debates, not two debates total, especially considering there's more than 20, almost 20, I think 25 candidates running. So it's important to kind of, make sure that each candidate goes through at least two debates before we really start to judge them big time. But, not surprisingly, the media is already jumping on the doom and gloom bandwagon for Bernie. So we have a couple of articles here that I'm going to go over. The first one here is from CNN. This one just lays it out, very just bluntly. Bernie Sanders 2020 is in big trouble. And this is an article written by Harry Enton. This is a guy that used to work, I believe, for 538 with Nate Silver. And both of those guys are very kind of fake, I would say like fake poll expert type guys, and they like to just kind of they like to judge everything based on kind of like their view of analytics. It's nothing is ever really kind of like factual and based on like what are the policies of this politician. They just kind of say like, oh, okay, well, where is he in the rankings, or where is he in the the poll rankings, and then we'll judge it based on that, and then right away we're going to decide that this person, in this case Bernie Sanders, is not doing very well. It does, they put aside whatever his performance was. They just go based on the polls. So let me just go through the article here. It's not too long, and I'll analyze it for you as we go through it here. So let's check it out. It says Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign is in trouble. While much of the attention in post-debate polling has focused on the drop of former Vice President Joe Biden, Sanders' polling looks far worse. Sanders' Iowa and national polls are quite weak for somebody with near universal name recognition. Sanders was at just 14% in CNN's latest national poll. That's down from 18% in our last poll. As important, Sanders is now running behind California Senator Kamala Harris and Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. Harris has 17%, Elizabeth Warren 15%. These are candidates who have lower name recognition than he does. It's not just the CNN poll either. Sanders doesn't look much better in Quinnipiac's latest poll, which puts him at 13%. A poll released Wednesday morning by ABC News and the Washington Post did have somewhat better news for him, putting him at 19%. Second behind Biden among Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, still an average of the three polls out this week, puts him at 15%. History has not been kind to primary runner-ups of previous primaries, polling this low of a position. I went back and looked at where 13 previous runner-ups since 1972 have been polling at this point in the primary. All six who went on to win the nomination were polling above Sanders' 15%. Indeed, we can widen it out to see how perilous Sanders' position is. Among all well-known candidates, only 9% polling at between 10% and 20% at this point went on to win the nomination. So 9% of the people polling have been 10 and 20%. So only 9% have won the nomination when they're polling between 10 and 20%, and Bernie is at 14. It says the early state polling is not much kinder to Sanders. A new Suffolk University poll has him at 9% among likely Iowa Democratic caucus goers. The first in the nation contest for Democrats is probably a must-win for Sanders. He barely lost it in 2016, yet he's behind Biden 24%, Harris 16%, and Warren 13%. It doesn't seem like there is a reservoir of support available for Sanders either. A mere 6% of likely caucus goers say he is their second choice. All told, only 14% list him as a first or second choice. Worse for Sanders is that he seems to be slipping in Iowa. That 9% for first choice is the worst he's done in any Iowa poll since at least December. Now it's not as if Sanders is disliked. According to our CNN poll, Sanders still overwhelmingly holds a positive rating among Democrats nationwide. The problem for Sanders is that there are a slew of alternatives. Warren has co-opted much of Sanders' message. Additionally, Harris seems to hold her own among liberals as well. Neither Harris nor Warren have to deal with the stench of the nasty 2016 primary. In fact, there doesn't seem to be any sign from Sanders that he has healed the wounds of the 2016 primary. You can best see this in the endorsement primary. Pretty much all successful previous runner-ups do a good job of capturing endorsements from members of Congress and governors. Sanders has the endorsement of just one member of Congress outside of Vermont. The good news for Sanders is that he has a ton of money. He raised another $18 million in the second quarter of 2019. Sanders also has a lot of fervent supporters. That means it'll be difficult to run him from the race. That base looks to be not large, though. We've obviously got a long way to go, but Sanders 2020 looks to be in major trouble. So, I mean, he's putting out a bunch of poll numbers here, already trying to portray Bernie as just, because he's down, I don't know what the biggest one was. What was it? 9%? Was it 9% in one of the polls? Yeah, 9% behind Warren, which is she was ahead by 4 points at 13%. Kamala Harris at 16%. I mean, that was one poll, and then another poll has him just 1 point under. Let's see, 1 point. What was he at? 15%? No, he's at 13%? Yeah, so 13%, 14%, and then 14% in the polls in another one of the polls, which is only 1% behind Elizabeth Warren, and Harris at 17%. So, I mean, it's a lot of this talk is just, poll talks this early is just way too hard to really predict where we're going to be headed when you try to kind of analyze and nitpick polls too much. Even the polls that don't look good, whether they look good for Bernie or don't look good for Bernie, I don't really like to focus on them too much, because I think a lot of them are oversampling too much. They were definitely doing that with a lot of polls before the debates, where they were oversampling boomers a lot, and then a lot of the boomers are in favor of Bernie Sanders. They're in favor of Joe Biden a lot more than Bernie Sanders, so they're definitely much more pro-Biden for sure. That was one example that kind of stood out to me, where I determined that I'm just not going to really put a lot of emphasis on the polls out there. But it's definitely important for Bernie Sanders, regardless of where he is on the polls, to make sure that he focuses on making sure that he does, he continues to push his message and make sure that he makes his voice heard. And that's what I'm saying. Like in the first debate, he wasn't really heard all that much, and Kamala Harris was definitely heard. Elizabeth Warren was center stage in the first debate, which did not involve Harris, Sanders, or Biden. So Warren was essentially by herself, being considered one of the more well-known ones, I guess, among the pack of 20, 20 or however many people, 25, candidates, but in that case 20, because there was 10 the first night, 10 the second night. Among those 10 that were with Elizabeth Warren, they were pretty unknown. They weren't really well known at all. And Warren was definitely the one that kind of stuck out in that pack the most, and she did really well. She was by herself, and she didn't get attacked. She, in my opinion, received a lot of easy questions. They set her up for MSNBC, the moderators and stuff there, they set her up to get very kind of like softball type questions. Nobody was going after her, whereas Bernie was, Eric Swalwell went after Bernie a little bit. I think it was Biden and Bernie kind of went after each other, but Biden didn't really go after Bernie that much. But the fact that Bernie stayed back a little bit more and let Kamala and Biden go at it and all that stuff, that stuck out to voters. And Warren, like I said, was by herself, so she kind of got to get ahead in the polls because she wasn't being attacked by anybody. She was by herself, and she was kind of just putting that message out there. She even said how she supported Bernie's plans, and she sounding very progressive, even though in my opinion she's not really that progressive, and she is getting a lot of favorability from at least much more favorability than you would expect from the Wall Street crowd and the corporate donors and stuff out there. They're warming up to her a lot more. There's articles that have been put out showing that regarding Elizabeth Warren. And that's definitely helping her. And when it comes to the corporate media, when they see how much the corporate donors are warming up to her, the corporate media is not going to be too tough on her, especially calling her out on Medicare for all and Wall Street reform and all that stuff. If she says she's in favor of Wall Street reform, that's fine. But then when she goes out there and puts is all kind of like chummy with the with like the different CEOs like Jamie Dimon, who's the head of who's the CEO, I think, of JP Morgan, people like that, that's going to make the media just go a lot easier on her, and she's going to have a lot easier time in general in running this when running in this primary. Bernie has a lot more to go up against because he has the entire establishment against him. He has 19 other candidates, at least 19 other candidates against him. And they're going to, even though they're going to be putting a lot, as they did in those debates, both debates, a lot of the debates they said, we agree with Bernie, we agree with Medicare for all, we agree with, college, free college. And then, now granted, not all of them were saying that, but a lot of them were definitely... They were trying to kind of co-opt his messages, his at least his the messages that he puts out in his policies, and kind of trying to seem more populist. But honestly, a lot of progressives like myself and other progressives I know out there, they're not falling for that kind of stuff, and they know that that's not really going to fly. and a lot of times they they try and portray themselves as being just like Bernie, or they're going to be sympathetic to Bernie, and honestly, it doesn't really sell very well to progressives. But there are a lot of other voters out there, and Bernie is going to have to appeal to them, and I feel like he will. I feel like Bernie is going to do a good job with that, and he definitely has. He has populist support. When you have that populist support, you're able to kind of reach out to regular people. And Bernie is definitely like that, for sure. I just wanted to go through one more article here where it talks about Bernie's stance in the polls. It says, this is an article from The Hill. The other article was from CNN, by the way, if I didn't mention. This one is from The Hill. It says, Sanders slips in polls, raising doubts about campaign. Senator Bernie Sanders is slipping in polls following the first Democratic debate, raising questions about whether he can recapture the insurgent energy that nearly carried him to the party's presidential nomination in 2016. 3 new polls released after the first Democratic debate show Sanders falling into 4th place behind former Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Kamala Harris, and Senator Elizabeth Warren. A 4th poll released Wednesday morning as this story was published found Sanders retaining his 2nd place, standing behind Biden. The ABC News Washington Post poll found Biden in the lead at 29%, followed by Sanders at 23%, and Harris and Warren lagging at 11%. The Sanders campaign says those counting him out are once again underestimating a candidate who surprised the political world 3 years ago and remains a small dollar fundraising juggernaut with an enthusiastic core of supporters. Sanders has an inexhaustible base of grassroots donors that will churn out tens of millions of dollars for him as long as he's in the race. On Tuesday, the campaign announced that it raised $18 million in the 2nd quarter, collected from about 1 million donors, giving an average of $18 apiece. Nearly the entire amount came from donors who will be able to give again. Wow, that's impressive. It says many of these donors are blue-collar voters who will be pivotal in determining the outcome of the 2020 election. Teaching is the most common profession among Sanders donors, and Walmart is the most common employer, according to the campaign. And while most of the buzz coming out of the first Democratic debate centered around Harris and Warren, the Sanders campaign said that it had its second best fundraising day of the year, the day after the debate, bringing in $2 million over the course of 24 hours. Quoting, who is this here? This is quoting Faz Shakir, which is his campaign manager. It says, I think many of you were wondering whether the Bernie Sanders campaign would persist and how strong it would be. There have been moments where I think people have written off the campaign. I think one of those moments was after the debate. We felt very good about his performance, and the numbers indicated we were generally right about that. But Sanders' rivals are stepping up to challenge him, including Warren, who is trying to overtake him as the party's progressive standard bearer. Harris's star turn at the debate vaulted her into direct competition with Biden for the top spot in the field, while South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg outraced Sanders in the 2nd quarter. It says, quoting a Democratic strategist here, John Renish, Bernie didn't scare anyone away from jumping into this race, and now he comes out of the debate with the worst possible outcome. Nobody is talking about him. In 2016, he benefited from being the only alternative to the establishment candidate. In 2020, the entire political world has changed except for him. His biggest problem right now is that he looks like a candidate of the past, and that's not a good place to be. Okay, the people that are making these arguments, I'm going to get to a segment in the next one where people are making this same stupid argument where Bernie is supposedly too consistent, and that means that he's not, he's somehow not evolved, but he's the same as he was in 2016. It makes no sense, so I don't want to get into that rant just yet. But that's the claim, a lot of the claims that they're making, and I'll be covering that soon. But I mean, that makes no fucking sense. These people, they're trying to come up with like every possible lame, weak attack against Bernie. Well, at least they are lame and weak, but they don't think that. But they think it's gonna stick to say that he's not being, or that he is consistent. So yeah, that's just ridiculous. And A lot of these Democratic strategists don't know what the hell they're doing. They're just kind of clueless, and all they care about is just like, the optics of like pushing any kind of like, bullshit talking point that they can come up with, and anything that, that can appeal to like the kind of the Bernie hating type of Democrats out there, the people that are not very pro Bernie, but they're going to be like, oh, whatever, like anything that they hear, that's anti Bernie, they'll love it pretty much. The rest of this article, you can read it. It's basically just going over some polls, and it quotes a couple of other pro-Bernie people, I think, and then another strategist who says that Sanders, doesn't have much of a chance. But it's pretty much the same kind of stuff. You guys check it out. I'll put the link in the in the description box below, so you guys could check it out. But it's just typical Bernie hating. It's nothing really that surprising. These people shouldn't be taken seriously at all. A lot of them are just your typical kind of clueless Democratic strategists and people that don't really care about policies. They just care about how you look in like a debate and how you talk, and if you're using using the right inflections in your voices, and your hands are moving the right way, and you're talking very passionately, but they don't really care about the policies. Ultimately, to them, the policies doesn't mean anything, because then if they end up putting out a policy that is too progressive, then they know they have to commit to that policy, and then they're going to be worried about how that supposedly plays, ultimately in the general election, when, like they're pretty much like scared of being too lefty or too progressive, and they want to be more centrist. So in this regard, it's much more just like, you just have to wait for the next debate to happen, because I guarantee you Bernie Sanders is going to pour it on a hell of a lot thicker in the next debate. I don't know when that next debate is going to be. I have to check, but it can't be too far out, maybe like a month or so from now. And Bernie Sanders is going to make his voice heard, and he's going to definitely come out guns blazing a hell of a lot harder than he did in this last debate. So if they want to rule him out, they count him out and talk about doom and gloom about him, that's fine, but that's not really going to be the case. And I think the Bernie Sanders campaign themselves know that as well.